All right, welcome to another episode of Birdsong. I'm your host, Kayuda, and in this episode, it seems like we are going to be exploring the world of smoke medicine, bird medicine, animism, walking the medicine ways, all of these important themes and topics with our guest for this week, who is a ceremonial beauty therapist, an earth-based Reiki practitioner. She has a love for horticulture. She's one with the plants, crafting incense and helping many on this dance of cultural reconnection, bioregional medicine. It's the Slavic Balkan bird lover, Carmen Nemet from Lulani Moon Therapies. Carmen, good to be here with you. Anything you want to add to that intro?
What an intro. Where do I go from there? Amazing.
Where do we go?
Thank you for having me, Kai.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Carmen. So when I was doing the pre-Birdsong episode research, I read a little bit about your history. And as you just mentioned, I came to learn that you grew up in a rural town in South Australia on Kaurna country, and you had a connection to the land growing up. However, what seemed like a dichotomy to me is that you found your way to working in salons, fancy hotels, five-star resorts, these sorts of things for, over 20 years. And I don't know what as, I presumed as a beauty therapist, but you can speak a bit more about that in a moment. But then somewhere along the way, you've woven this world of ceremony, animism, ancestral reconnection, bioregional, horticulture, and herbalism into the mix. And I even seen a video of you from about a decade ago where you were doing intricate line work and geometric art pieces.
You saw that? Oh my goodness, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so there's a bit going on by the scenes of it. So it would be great to have us, or have you tell us the story or give us some of the background of how these worlds have come to coalesce into who you are now and what it is that you're offering. So yeah, take it any direction you like from there.
Wow, Kai, thank you. And actually hearing that, it actually makes me feel a little bit emotional because some of these things that you've touched on, it seems so distant to me and it seems so in the past that I've forgotten that all of those things were part of my curiosity or experience to get me to where I am. So basically I grew up in, country South Australia on Kaurna country in a little town called Redbanks. And basically it was a street with, about 20 houses. We had, no shops. The nearest town was probably about 6 k's away, which isn't that far away, but that was where we did our local grocery shopping and whatnot. And I used to ride horses. So, I had this deep connection to animals. And I guess my father being Croatian, he would tend to the land. We, pretty much lived from garden to table. Mum was a veterinary nurse. So, she had this connection to animals as well. So I grew up in a very, a very wholesome kind of way. And then, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here, Kai.
No, you're good. You're just talking about growing up on the land and then transitioning right into the strange world of five-star hotels. And
yeah, that's right. It's such a story. So, yeah, I guess for me, even as a young teenager, I was always, in the garden. I was mowing the lawn. I was, helping Dad with the rotary hoe, churning up the soil, tending to all the farm animals. And I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but, if I think about my very first connection with a bird, I remember standing in the horse paddock. And I was probably, at the time, maybe about 14, 15. And I was standing in the middle of the horse paddock. And all of a sudden, it was a really warm day. The paddock was dusty. And all of a sudden, I looked up and I heard this raven calling. And it was this moment that I had with this bird that I'll never forget. And I felt that he was directly communicating with me in some way. And it was just this pause, this moment of time that was such a pause with this raven. Anyway, time went on and I forgot about that experience, and I'll get to, that crucial moment later on. But then, I guess, I enjoyed, like I said, tending to the land. And eventually I came to the age where I was ready to study. So I left school. I was ready to study. I had no idea what to do. Truth be told, I actually wanted to become a park ranger. I always wanted to be a park ranger. And, at school, academia wasn't my strong point. So, I wasn't good at science. I wasn't good at maths. I was more, artistic and, a very dreamlike kind of person.
Mm.
And eventually I thought, what am I going to study? What am I going to do? And one of my girlfriends at the time, she started studying beauty therapy. So I went along and studied beauty therapy. I had no idea what it was. As the course went on, I absolutely hated it, but I wanted to drop out, and I just kept going. So I had some guidance to keep going. So I kept going, and cut a long story short, I eventually found a job in the Adelaide Hilton, which was considered as a 5-star hotel at the time. So going from the country, I was living about an hour and a half away. I got the position at the Adelaide Hilton, and that's where I started, my career as a beauty therapist. And from there, I went through times where I wanted to drop out, and I felt, the love of plants calling me, and I really missed country life. So then, somewhere along the line there, I took up studying horticulture, and I started studying floristry as well. And there's just so much to tell, Kai.
It sounds like
any moment you can rein me in, because I can talk a lot about this subject. So
no, it's nice. It's nice to get some of your backstory before we get into some of the deeper themes of the work that we're both so heavily involved in.
Yeah, that's right. So studied horticulture, and I studied floristry at the same time as working, part-time in, beauty therapy. And eventually I left the industry, and I worked in horticulture for a period of time. And that's where I guess my curiosity to the path of spirit started kind of peaking and weaving its way in. And, all of those little connections that I had as a little girl, with the raven, with the land, tending to the plants, and experiencing country in that way, it started to kind of make sense to me as to why, I was being led down the path I was. And then eventually...
I'll jump in there. Hold that thread. What was it about the study or the deepening into horticulture that kind of was there a specific experience within that kind of led to more of this remembrance or more of this connection of the ancestral ways?
Look, I'm not sure if there was a particular moment, but maybe it was something to do with where I was studying. So I was studying in a school of agricultural ways in a country town. So that kind of took me back to the country.
Right.
So I don't know if it was anything to do with that. And the nursery that I worked with, it was probably my connection with one of the other staff members that was there that actually reignited or triggered this path to the medicine ways. And she was actually a Reiki practitioner. And one day, I went to go and see her. I had no idea what it was. And the way that she spoke about, the plants, and the way that she spoke about being this, grandmother, she was probably in her 60s and she was a grandmother. And, I remember having a conversation with her in the nursery. And I said to her something about, wouldn't you prefer to be called Nana rather than, than grandma? And she says, oh, no, Carmen. She said, I am the grand of all mothers. And we had this beautiful, connection over being the grand of all mothers. And I thought, this woman's incredible. And then I went along and, went and experienced a Reiki session with her. And so, I don't know if it was a moment, within that nursery with a particular plant that I had a connection with, but it was this meeting with this woman and this interaction I had with this woman, and she became like a teacher for me. So in the space of working with the plants, but we would also have these spiritual conversations because I was very curious at the time. So yeah, that was an experience I had working at the nursery. And then from there, that's when the floodgates opened. And then,
And then Lulani Moon Therapies was born during that time. Correct. Or shortly thereafter?
Correct.
Yeah,
shortly thereafter, yeah. So, yeah, that's right.
And then what were the initial stages of you kind of blossoming into what you call Lulani Moon Therapies? And then what's the path look like of evolution up until now?
Okay. So, so from working in the nursery, I decided that I really missed working with people. You know, in the nursery, what you're doing, yes, you're working with other staff members, you're having great conversations, but your interaction with people is very limited. You know, definitely in the capacity that I loved and enjoyed. You know, I'm a real nurturer at heart. You know, I care for things, I tend to things. So, you know, I really missed that connection of holding people and really getting to know people on an intimate level, like you do in beauty therapy. So I ended up going back to beauty therapy, working in another salon. And, it was from there that I actually opened up my own business. So, I think I was still working in horticulture part-time, and I started opening my own little business on the side. I found a salon to rent a space in. Slowly built my clientele. I got to the point where I was able to, work solely for myself for about 5 or 6 days a week. And, during that time, I was, getting curious about the spirituality, having beautiful interactions with people. I met somebody who was really intrinsic to the medicine path for me. And he was actually an old family friend. And that was probably when I was about 26. And him and his beautiful partner have property in the Flinders Ranges, actually. And they invited me up to their property, and I spent a lot of time, on country up there. And this is where I started really, building nature connection, learning about the land, learning how to listen to the land. And, eventually I moved out of Adelaide, went up to Byron Bay, worked in 5-star resorts up there. And eventually I landed in Melbourne. So that's where I am, in a 20-year period, condensed down. That's where I am.
So is the ceremonial beauty therapy aspect, is that still one of the core offerings at the moment?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I would love to hear you put language to what does ceremonial beauty therapy entail, and then how do you usually describe the way that it differs from, let's say, traditional beauty therapy practices?
Yeah. So ceremonial beauty therapy is probably it's a phrase that I gave to myself, because it best described the way that I work now. So as a beauty therapist, as a traditional beauty therapist, a lot of the time when you're in hotels or when you're in day spas, you're working, very everything's on a very tight time restraint. And basically what happens is, in between every treatment, you have a 15-minute turnaround time. So that's really not a lot of time to be with someone, to be tending to them, having to turn over the bed and then greet your next client, and not to mention reset your own energy system. So for me, having my own business, I thought, I actually don't enjoy working like that. And for me, it doesn't feel very honoring to the spirit of my client, to the energetics or the spirit of what I do. And, when, for me, coming into a place of working from my whole heart, I wanted to be able to allow more space for that, that service. So I started weaving in, smoke medicine, and, started weaving in, just that, applying herbs to the body, and really having a little bit more time and space in between clients. So where I would be doing 6 clients a day, maybe I'm only doing 2 clients a day. And I'm, really, holding space for that person in a way that, has integrity and really honors the medicine of all things and the spirit of all things. So
the way that
it's
you
more of a
describe
ceremonial act.
I totally get it. The way that you describe the conventional beauty therapy practices, it seems like there are corollaries, or it runs parallel with the allopathic medical model, when you go and see a GP and it's just one person in, they're out, and it's just rinse and repeat.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then, okay, so what you're reminding me of is my own journey of transitioning from high school into university. And this is just a tangent, but I'll get back into asking you about bird medicine in a moment. But I remember getting to the end of that and literally being handed, must have been a book or something with all of the subjects or that were available, or rather not subjects, but all of the courses, the university courses that were available to study, and just being like, pick one. And I would go down the list, and I was big into playing drums at that time. And I saw marketing music industry. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to do that. I'm going to study that. And then it maybe only took 2 or 3 months of actually being at university for me to realize, damn, this sucks. I do not care about macroeconomics and microeconomics and business marketing and all of this stuff. All I wanted to do was play drums. So that didn't last all that long, but yeah, it seems like such a common theme of going through that process. And yeah, I'm losing my train of thought there too, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge journey, and a lot of pressure, I think, that's actually put on. There's a lot of pressure that's put on us at that particular age to, what do you want to do? What do you want to
Totally.
study? Who do you want to be? And you're just still, wanting to go out and explore and have fun. So yeah, yeah.
Let me ask you about this. So if anyone was to jump on your Instagram page, if they scroll for long enough, they'll notice that you certainly have the affinity for birds. Like, you use a lot of bird motifs in your program names and in your visual aesthetics. And I know you just finished up with a program with Andrew Turnbull, which was a bird
Yes.
language retreat.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to hear a little bit or a lot about your relationship with birds. You've mentioned the raven in the very beginning. So there's a continuation of that story somewhere here. But yeah,
Look,
there's an
I'm
invitation there.
sure. Thank you, Kai. I'm sure we could talk about birds all day. Well, I certainly could. It's a bit like ancestry. To me, birds and ancestry are just such a, incredible subjects. But look, I guess my love of birds, it really didn't develop until, probably the last, maybe 8 years or so. And my grandfather, my great grandfather actually, he bred birds. So he bred princess parrots, all kinds of parrots actually, and finches. So I spent a lot of time, with my great grandfather, and I, didn't necessarily handle birds, but they were around a lot. So, I wonder whether, in hindsight, I wonder whether, spending a lot of time with my great grandfather, sparked that kind of interest and that love of birds. But really, it's really deepened since being here in Melbourne, which has been about 8 years. That's where I've really learned to deepen my connection to the ways of birds, in particular bird language. So, now it's incredible to be able to decipher when there's a bird of prey around, or when there's, a sulphur-crested cockatoo around. And obviously that has taken me years to develop, that knowing, I guess. And that's generally just through observation, through, senses. So activating the sight, activating the hearing, and, really just observing the natural environment as to, how these birds are interacting. So for me, birds are amazing indicators of the environment. And they tell me, as I'm sure you understand as well, they tell us so much about what's happening within the immediate environment. And there's even some stories of pure magic. When you are really tuning into the language of birds and the birdscape, it's absolutely incredible what you can witness. So yeah.
Tell us about your time with Andrew just recently.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That was amazing. That was fascinating. Wow. Okay.
For those who don't know, maybe we should give a little bit of an introduction into Andrew Turnbull. How would you describe Andrew? He's certainly a bird language and bird behaviouralist guru. Probably one of the greats in Australia.
Absolutely. Well, I only really just started hearing about Andrew the last couple of months. So, it's not like I know him well at all, but obviously after being there, on this bird language retreat, definitely a bird language guru. And he just has this deep connection, with bird language, and watching him, being out in the bush, and the way that he's so plugged in to the network of birds was really inspiring, and it was amazing to witness. So my time there in Gembrook, probably the most incredible part was learning new techniques to activate the senses when it comes to listening to the language of birds.
Okay.
And, that would be, something like, sitting in the bush with, a blindfold on. I'm not sure if you've experienced that, Kai, with your nature connection work, sitting there blindfolded.
Certainly have.
Yeah. And that for me was absolutely incredible. So we would spend time out in the bush, in our sit spots, just sitting there and witnessing, the natural world and sharpening our senses and, and nature observation. And can I pause for a second?
Yeah, totally. So we were saying, bird language, the medicine of birds, opening our sensory antenna to allow more information to come our way to ascertain from the birds what it is that's happening in our natural environment before perhaps we have a chance to directly observe a lot of those changes ourselves. That's typically how I language the importance of tuning into birds, and just what a great portal it is for all of us, because almost no matter where we are, there's always going to be some sort of bird around, a bird that we can learn from.
Absolutely.
And I think I might be making things up here, but I reckon I have seen you speak about the relationship between the birds that frequent your place and also the plants that you tend. So the birds having a relationship with the plants that you're growing or that are in your area. Is that something I've made up, or have you spoken to that?
No, you definitely haven't made that up. Yeah, I think, and it's something that I could have made up as well. I mean, a lot of, remembering that a lot of the content that I share and talk about, I mean, this is, some things I read, obviously there's lots of teachers that have inspired me over the years, but a lot of the information is intuitive. A lot of, so really from that place of, intuition, I mean, how much have I made up? I don't know, but really it feels right in that moment, and I can see correlations, whether it's an energetic correlation, whether it's let's say, for example, when I think about mugwort, which is actually sitting behind me on my drum there, and feeling that mugwort and the raven have a relationship. And when I think about bioregional landscape and bioregional shifts in the seasons, I don't know if you saw, I did a post a little while ago about it being Raven's territory moon. So at this particular time of year, in the area that I'm in, and it would be the same across the board as well, even where you are, the ravens are quite vocal. This time of year, they're very territorial. They're all, looking for mates, which means that they actually have to look for, suitable nesting sites. So there's a lot of kind of, a lot of arguing, argy-bargy between the birds. And also this time of year, the mugwort is in flower. So this is the mugwort's power season. So, when I look at those two similarities, and mugwort being very much a herb or a plant of the crone, the wise woman. She's also, a plant of the darkness or the shadows, in a loving way, and also the raven can represents qualities of that as well. So there can be this mirroring that goes on between plants and the birds. So and I find that can be a really incredible medicine, a bioregional medicine, or an ally to actually bring into, everyday life. So, and we all have the capacity to be able to look, through a lens like that to incorporate, plant and, bird medicine into our lives.
Yeah, totally. It's touching upon this larger theme that I'll often invite others into a curiosity of, which is the displacement of the seasons over here. Just how such a strange thing it is that we have the default 4-season calendar: spring, summer, autumn, winter.
Exactly.
And how each place, I mean, just being over in the Grampians, they consider there to be 6 major seasons over there. And no matter where we are, our own bioregional location, they're going to have their own seasons, and their seasons within seasons. And the only way that we get to know them is through, like in your case, spending 8 years in the same place. Have you been in the same place that entire time?
Yeah, I have.
And it's those observations over the seasons and noticing the relationship between these birds and the plants, the raven and the mugwort. But it's such an important thing.
Oh, look, it is. And it comes back to, I think that also helps us to come back to, ancestral connection and that sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Because, most of us, non-indigenous, people of this land, of this
Mm.
country, we've been really severed from our ancestral connection. And remembering that all of our ancestors would have, or maybe still do, practice bioregional observation and
Mm-hmm.
really working with the seasons. So they would have been looking at, the river systems and the different birds, migratory birds, or the animal behavior to indicate what was actually going on in the landscape, in the natural world.
Mm.
So the more that we practice bioregional observation, on the land that we live upon, it actually, I find in my experience has activated that sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And it also decolonizes our own seasonal calendar as well,
Mm.
you know, and builds that connection with the landscape, which I think is really vital for, the healing of the collective.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, using that word decolonize, we're going to circle back around to that shortly into something that you have recently spoken of, and I suspect it's a large part of your offerings, which is decolonizing smoke medicine. So let's park that to the side for a moment. But talking about the raven, there's that story that you mentioned, but also wanted to tag onto that. Are there any other specific bird species or birds that frequent your area that hold a special significance or symbolism or teachings for you? And the invitation to speak on that might offer insight into other people developing their own relationship and gaining insights from birds and how they situate themselves and orient themselves within their own bioregional location and the cyclical
Mm,
shift of the seasons. So,
mm,
yeah,
mm.
take that where you want to.
Yeah, I mean the bird. I guess currently the bird that has returned to this area is the gang cockatoo,
Mm.
and I know I believe you have the gangs in your area as well, Kai.
Not often, but
Oh, you
every now
don't?
and
Okay.
then. Every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm wondering even in your area, because what will happen is in summer, the gangs will be in the higher altitudes. So they'll be, up in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Then they return down to the lowlands this time of year, which is autumn.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually endangered at the moment. So, they're an endangered species. So they're, for me, they're a really important marker of the landscape and an important marker of time.
Mm.
And and the climate, the shifting in the climate, for whatever reason, yeah, they're a really vital bird to the landscape. So, they've got a particular call pattern, gang
Mm.
cockatoos, and when you hear them, um, they're described as a creaking door, like so when you hear them, they're like this creaking door that opens and closes, and they're absolutely beautiful. So when I hear those gang cockatoos, I know that autumn has returned here.
Mm.
Yeah, but they did actually return a little bit earlier this time round. So
Mm-hmm.
I found that they were actually coming in February. They returned.
Mm.
Usually they come in about March, but that's obviously, who knows, things shift and weave in and out with the season. So they're, really in tune with those subtle shifts that actually take place here.
Mm.
So at the moment, the gang's a really important bird for me. Spiritually, I don't know if they have as much, of symbology as say the raven would, or even the owl for me is quite a big bird,
Mm.
a powerful bird.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just feel like, naming the gang cockatoo to spread awareness that they are, indeed endangered, and we need to start kind of, tending
Mm.
to that. Yeah.
Have you been able to pair the gang cockatoo's return with anything else that's happening in your bioregional location, like the shifting of the seasons in any other way?
Usually, I mean, for me, as always, the birds are the markers. So
Mm.
the king parrots return
Mm.
at the same time the gangs return.
Mm-hmm.
So they typically, they're the two birds that actually return at the same time.
Mm.
So I don't know if obviously it must be a particular food source.
Mm.
So I do know that there are some flowering gums at the moment. And there's a particular berry in flower, so the gangs can be seen snacking on a particular berry. I don't
Mm.
know what they're called, but
Okay.
they're not a native species.
Mm.
The particular plant that they're snacking on, but they
Mm.
will, eat the berries in flower or in fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is that the berries are red. So, you've got the gang cockatoo with this incredible red feathered crop. and they're snacking on these red berries. So, you know, there's that kind of mirroring again taking place between the plant and the bird. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been longing for, because we've been out in the Central Highlands now for must be 3, getting on close to 4 months, and because my work is always taking me to different places, which is amazing. But I haven't had the chance yet to really start to allow myself to be open to all of the shifts that I'm noticing in our bioregional location and be able to pair them up like I did when we were back in the Vic High Country, because we were over there for just over 4 years. So tending those 14 acres day in, day out, you become one with the landscape. But over here, I certainly still feel a sense of my own displacement and not knowing a lot of the animals and the birds and the plants that pop in and out at different times of the season. So yeah, just naming my longing for that, and how I really think that for all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, that is a crucial part of, as you spoke to earlier, cultivating more of our sense of belonging.
Yeah,
because it's something that's universally human.
Yeah.
Our desire for connection and our desire to belong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just touching on that too, Kai, it does take, you know, as you would know, it takes time, you know, and it takes that, you know, that dedication and that space. I mean, obviously we're all busy with work and kids and whatever else we're tending to. So, you know, you do have to have that time and space and that, you know, a little bit of discipline sometimes, I guess, just to kind of go out and just sit, even if it's for 10 minutes. And, you know, keeping a journal's really good too. And, you know, remembering as well that, you know, it's like getting to know a person. You know, you think about, you know, getting to know one another. It generally takes a good few years to really get to know somebody. And the land's the same. You know, the land's the same.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So the raven. What else have you got to say about that raven story?
Oh, the raven. Oh, the raven. Yeah. So I'm sure that, you know, that raven has been with me for a very long time. You know, the energetics or the spirit of the raven has been with me for a very long time. And it wasn't until I went to Byron, I lived up there for a couple of years. After I left Adelaide, I went up to Byron. And there was a raven that I developed a really close relationship with. And, you know, I named him Cav. His nickname was Cav. And I could actually call him from the tree. And he would fly down and he would sit with me. I mean, usually there was food involved. That's how I, you know, lured him in. Was through eggs and, you know, bits of fruit. And, you know, eventually you know, we built this beautiful relationship together. And that was at a time when I was painting. I was into a bit of artwork at the time. And you know, he would come down as I was sitting there painting and he would just sit with me. And yeah, that was a really incredible relationship that I had with this one raven. And when I left the area, I really mourned him. You know, I missed him. I grieved him. And then I developed another relationship with another raven here in Melbourne. And you know, same thing. I could call him. He would come and sit with me. And yeah, it was really incredible. So the raven has always been a very significant bird for me. In fact, you know, they still are. So they're in this area here. I've developed relationship with them, which once again has taken time. And you know, anybody can develop relationship with birds. You know, I'm not special or anything like that. It just, like I said before, it takes, you know, discipline. It takes dedication, patience as well. You know, because remembering that you're developing a relationship, which takes time. So yeah, the raven's pretty special bird.
Yeah, you remind me of my own. It was a morning, really. Yeah. Not a good morning, as in good morning, the sun's up. Yeah. But yeah, it was a morning and a yearning. It was the departure of a relationship between myself and a platypus, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, when we were living in a town a little bit south of Garryword, the Grampians.
Yeah.
After being there, I usually tell this story as a bit of an introduction to earth meditations or sit spots for people during my own gatherings. And I won't go into the full story, but yeah, we lived right beside a creek. And after a couple of months of living there, I developed a bit of a sit spot down there, and there were some big, beautiful oak trees that were sucking up all the water from underneath the creek, and a couple of bends in the river, and the birds would start to develop a relationship with me and different items of clothing that I would wear. So if I went down with, let's say, a red jumper, or was it a red jacket that I had, which is unusual for me to be wearing red. But when I would wear that down after wearing my blue jacket down for a long, long time, I would notice that their relationship would differ. They'd be a little bit more distant for some time, as opposed to knowing me and my blue jacket straight away. But yeah, after some time, I noticed that there was a platypus that lived right there. And that's what a remarkable thing to go down day after day and develop a relationship with a single platypus. And along a couple of kilometres of that creek, there were lots of platypus, but it was this one particular bend in the creek where I sat down, and yeah, after quite a few months, that platypus would come closer and closer, and we got to the stage where I'd be standing right on the bank of the river, and the platypus would just be hovering right on top of the water for what seemed like a significant amount of time. You know, at the longest it may have been 40 seconds, which is really not that long, but still just circling very, very slowly, getting right up close to the bank, and we were just looking at each other. And yeah, that was a really sad thing for me to part ways, because I felt like that was a really beautiful, and there was a time in my life where I was quite solemn and introspective and bringing a lot of poetry into my life. So I felt like that was a real kind of mythopoetic relationship that had developed between myself and the platypus. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's really beautiful and pretty special, because they're quite elusive, platypus. So
Yeah, some people maybe only see one or two platypus their entire lives, or wish to see
yeah,
one but never do. So yeah, what a special
yeah,
thing that was for me.
oh, that's really special. Thanks
Yeah,
for sharing.
yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Decolonizing smoke medicine.
Mm,
So
mm.
smoke medicine, crafting incense. This is another big part of your offerings, and you have quite the extensive Etsy store. That's for sure.
Oh, you've seen that, right?
I've seen it. I've seen it, and all the 5-star reviews. People are
Right.
loving what you have
Yeah.
been creating over the years. So, but
Oh,
yeah, this
thank
idea
you.
of
Yeah, look,
decolonizing
it's
smoke medicine.
gosh,
Where
that
do
I
we
mean, that
start
was
with that?
obviously I didn't touch on how that came to be, the smoke medicine, but I've been really practicing that for the last maybe 6 years or so, maybe, and the last 3 years really seriously getting into crafting and teaching, which has been incredible. Um, but yeah, the smoke medicine. So that really, I think it's important just to touch on how that came about. If there's space to do so, but
Absolutely.
um, we all know white sage. That's commonly what we see, in terms of, out in the social media ethers, and, a lot of us know and understand how to use white sage. But something that I've obviously learned, now, is that, we really have to kind of be mindful of our practice around smoke medicine, because unfortunately, which I'll probably touch on a little bit later on, but we really need to start, decolonizing our smoke medicine practice. And, white sage is not the only plant medicine that we can use for smudging our spaces.
Dun, 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 shock horror.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Even though, it's an incredible plant, it's very dear to me. I grow, lots of white sage here on the property, and I've got quite a relationship with it. But going back to how I first discovered smoke medicine, I ended up doing a couple of, I think it was about a 4-week course here in Melbourne. And it was all about using herbs for the dream space, and how incorporating particular herbs in our dreaming realm can actually support us to tune into the dreaming, to incorporate into journey work, and those altered spaces or states of consciousness or reality. Anyway, the woman that was actually teaching the workshop, her name was Jenny, beautiful woman and very incredibly knowledgeable woman. She was actually burning each of the herbs individually on a charcoal disc. And I had never seen a charcoal disc before. I'd certainly never seen anybody burning on a charcoal disc before. And I was absolutely, mesmerized by this smoke moving and weaving and dancing through the space. And that really sparked that curiosity. And from there, I ended up, experimenting, blending my own herbal blends and making my own incenses. I would share them with her and send her incense, and from there it just grew. So, from there, I ended up doing a little bit of study online, and I learned how to make sticks and cones. And I started incorporating, replacing the white sage, in my practice. Because years ago, I would just buy white sage. I had no idea about the ethical, ramifications and implications of, buying unsustainable white sage. So I started, using my own smoke medicine within my practice, which has obviously, led me to what I'm doing now. And something that smoke medicine also led me to was connecting into my own cultural roots and ancestral roots. And that's a lot of what I teach, in my workshops, encouraging people to get curious about, exploring smoke medicine from their ancestry, because that helps us to decolonize our smoke medicine. And it helps us to slowly replace those other smoke medicines where there's potentially cultural harm being done. So, yeah.
What could you speak to in terms of this notion of cultural harm? What do you observe in the smoke medicine practice?
Well, yeah, a big one. Once again, we'll turn to white sage, just because we know it quite well here in Western culture. A lot of the time, white sage, when it is harvested, say in parts of America, parts of the States, it's often over harvested, or it's wild harvested. And a lot of the time when that happens, due to the Western demand, the traditional people will go to use the medicine, and a lot of the time it's unavailable because it's been taken for other purposes. So that's what I'm talking about with cultural harm. So it's really important that we preserve and step away from any kind of wild harvesting, or growing your own is probably the best thing that we can do a lot of the time, if you can. Growing your own smoke medicine, particularly white sage. And touching on too that a lot of the white sage that you're buying in these metaphysical stores, most of the time it's actually coming from China, and grown in big kind of warehouses and sprayed and over harvested as well. So the plant actually doesn't have any time to put all of the medicine and energy into its leaves, and it's over harvested. So the minute it has any kind of leaf matter large enough, it's harvested and bound up and sold. So the integrity and the respect towards the plant is often lost. So yeah, it's not only are the traditional people being mistreated or disrespected, but the plant is also being disrespected as well and mistreated. So for me, that lacks any kind of integrity, and it's really important that we don't support those practices.
Yeah, sure. And when you're talking about the plant being disrespected, again, we're
Yeah.
zooming out and seeing the larger theme of
Yeah.
developing, cultivating, having this animistic relationship towards the plants that we're
Exactly.
working with, and not just seeing them as a resource or a commodity just for our use.
That's right.
Yeah. So Salvia apiana, white sage, that's a big one. What do you usually suggest to others, or what kind of invitations do you usually offer when it comes to, you've mentioned this piece about returning to our ancestry, or, I guess learning about what our ancestors or the places from which we've come from, what they have used in terms of smoke medicine, but then also what's available to us on our lands that we live. So there's certainly a conversation here about this convergence of the two. What do you usually suggest to people, or what kind of invitations do you have there to get curious about?
So, well, I think a really important note to make as well is that not everybody feels safe enough either, to connect into their culture or to their ancestry. So, for me and maybe for you, I'm not sure, but maybe we feel safe enough to connect back into it.
It's a good point.
You know what I mean? So I think we've got to have that conversation too.
Yeah.
So for those that perhaps don't feel safe enough to connect into ancestry, or perhaps don't know their ancestry, whether it be through adoption or whatever the story is. It's my invitation to people that maybe identify with that is that, get curious about a plant that you love. Making sure that it's non-toxic, making sure that it's, perhaps medicinal or edible. Get curious about that plant and learn about it and invite it into your life. And, perhaps practice using it as smoke medicine in that way. So you might, let's say, for example, I'm going to say rosemary because I love rosemary. Say if you've got a connection with rosemary, you might grow it. You're tending to it. You're learning about that plant. And then, through doing that, that we're going back to that, obviously that bioregional observation again, or, that observation with a plant, you're building relationship and connection. And then maybe the plant gets to a certain point and you might harvest a little bit, you dry it out and you use it as smoke medicine. So, there's so many other plants that you can use and explore. They don't have to be plants from your ancestry, but I think if we want to really, cultivate that sense of belonging, then, an ancestral connection and that revival, it's a really wonderful opportunity to explore plants from your ancestry.
So rosemary is perhaps a common alternative to using
Yes.
white sage. I mean, it's a common garden culinary herb.
Exactly.
What do you find are some other common herbs? Because people might want to go and develop their own relationship with plants, but may not know really where to start. And of course, and intuitive guidance is one way, as are the herbs that we use, that we are using already or that might grow in our garden. But what do you find are some other common herbs that people are replacing or using?
Sage is a great one, just the common Salvia officinalis. So, I actually have that growing side by side, in my garden. So I have the Salvia apiana, Salvia officinalis. They grow beautifully together. So your common garden sage is a good one to use. It grows abundantly. You can use thyme. What else have we got? We've got mint you can use as well. Native thyme is another good one. So you can buy a lot of the native herbs from nurseries and grow them. And another good one that you can obviously use is lemon myrtle too. If you want to grow your own, you can cultivate lemon myrtle and use that as smoke medicine. But I find rosemary incredibly powerful to use as a smoke medicine though. So, and even fresh. So we don't always have to burn herbs. We can actually just have them with us fresh and, activate the senses, the sense of smell and getting the scent of that plant into the olfactory system. That really helps to reset the nervous system. So you can actually use plants fresh. You don't always have to burn them.
Yeah, that's great. So then we're touching upon really the practicalities of smoke medicine. So what have you actually got to say about the practice?
Yeah, about the practice.
Yeah.
Ooh. What would you like to know about the practice?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of the practicalities that you could speak to, and it seems like such an obvious thing, perhaps to some, when it comes to smudging a space, but it could be quite foreign to people as well. So it's just an open invitation to speak about what you think are some of the important foundations for someone to know when it comes to working with smoke medicine and smudging and the different ways in which we're going to cleanse or clear a space or activate our olfactory system, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I guess firstly, some people actually really don't like being around smoke at all. So, for those people that don't want to use smoke in their space but still want to clear a space and obviously clear themselves, like I just touched on, actually, I've got a piece of rosemary here. So, what you can do with the fresh herb is you can actually just crush it, press it. So you're releasing all of those volatile oils and then you're inhaling it. You're maybe brushing it over the body. So you're giving yourself a little kind of, a brush or a stroke down with those herbs.
Yeah, it's almost like a subtle form of aromatherapy.
It is. Absolutely. It's aromatherapy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and there are obviously cultures that will use herbs in that way where they're actually brushing down the body. So there's actually no smoke being released. So, it is an alternative. I will do both depending on, let's just say, what my client needs. So I'm talking about in my treatment space. Sometimes I will offer smoke. Sometimes I won't. So it's just you can connect in with the plant in that way, crushing the plant, releasing the aromatics, brushing it over the body. Or if you want to use smoke, quite often what I will do is I will clear my space with smoke, the chosen smoke medicine. whether it's frankincense on a charcoal disc, or burning my own homegrown sage, or burning pine. Pine is a beautiful one to burn. So I'll clear the space in that way, and it really helps to obviously clear any of the negative energies that it might have accumulated in a space. And you're focusing on the corners of the room where energy likes to sit, and then when that space has, I guess, come back to a neutral place, it's a really beautiful idea to make an offering to that space. So you might want to offer a second lot of smoke medicine to that place, because when you've got a space of neutrality, it's very easy for something else to come into that space. So you're essentially making another offering to that
Yeah, it's beautiful.
that space. Yeah. So I like to work like that. So yeah, I usually do 2 rounds of smoke. Then when my client arrives, I'm offering them smoke medicine. And then what we do is we sit down and we crush herbs and we inhale them, and that prepares the body. Yeah.
I've seen you practice a particular type of like it's a way of creating your smoke medicine using, I don't know what it is. Is it a Japanese technique?
Oh yeah. Yes. With the rice, with the ash. Is that the one you're
Yeah,
talking
with the
about?
white. Is there a white ash?
Yes.
Yeah, can you
Yes.
speak to that?
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
first
Sure.
time that I've seen it when you posted. I think you've posted a couple of times about it. I've come
Yeah.
across it somewhere along the journey. But yeah, this
That
looks
is.
really interesting.
It's a beautiful practice. So incense is, pan-cultural, so lots of different cultures around the world will have their ways of connecting into to incense or to smoke medicine. So the Japanese, and obviously I don't claim to know everything about it, I'm only speaking from a place of being inspired by it.
Sure.
And the Japanese are master incense crafters. Everything is absolutely meticulous. So the particular ceremony that you're talking about is called kodo, which translates to listening to scent. And so what that is, and yeah, isn't it beautiful?
I know that
Listening to
is.
scent.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah. And so what that is it's a particular incense called neriko. And neriko is an incense made up of fruits, berries, jams, honey. Everything's ground into a powder and formulated into this beautiful kind of resinous paste. Traditionally, that paste or that dough is actually buried in a clay dish, and it's put in a clay dish and it's buried in the earth for about a year. So over that time, it ferments and it cures. Then traditionally what happens is that there's a ceremony called kodo, which is listening to scent. And so there's a heat source in a particular bowl, which sits kind of in between a substance called white rice ash. So it's a very fluffy kind of powder.
Okay.
And there's a charcoal disc which is buried within this ash. And then there's a mica plate that's put on top of the ash, and then the incense, the little bit of neriko gets put on top of that mica plate. And what happens is, instead of it burning, it actually just unfolds and it melts gently. So you're getting this gentle releasing of the aromatics. And in ceremony, the Japanese will sit and they'll actually inhale it very gently and they'll listen to the scent. So they're able to actually decipher, which herb it is, which berry it is. And yeah, it's a beautiful ceremony to watch. You can actually Google it on YouTube and you can watch the ceremonies, and it's just beautiful. So that's my inspiration behind, creating that incense. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that just such a beautiful phrase? Listening to the scent. And I mean, the
Listening to scent.
Japanese culture is
Yeah.
just such an inspiration for the way that they
Yeah.
practice their ceremonies with such
Yeah.
presence and poise and grace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
What kind of
beautiful.
insights have you gleaned from your own Slavic Balkan heritage when it comes to, I mean, there's a larger question there about traditional animistic practices, but really as it pertains to this conversation about smoke medicine?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, look, that's something that I'm really still trying to reclaim, and learn about. I mean, I know that rosemary, chamomile, sage, they're really big plants to people of the Balkans. and to, Slavic kind of heritage. And I do know that, a lot of the herbs are put in, I guess, bowls and offered as smoke medicine, especially when there's illness or disease or sickness. But, as far as I know, a lot of my ancestors are Catholic. So a lot of the time that, frankincense is used, or myrrh incense of, churches. But it's actually really difficult to find, information around smoke medicine and Slavic culture. So, it is there, but it's not really directly something that I've grown up with. So I'm in that process of trying to reclaim that and learn, relearn. I'm basically relearning. Yeah.
I missed the last 10 seconds of that. The connection was poor, but what I got the sense of is
Yeah,
it's
it was
something
like,
that you're still relearning. And
yeah. So basically, it's something that I haven't actually grown up around. My Croatian grandmother, she didn't burn incense or anything like that. It was, something that I'm trying to reclaim and relearn. The herbs of the Slavic people and specific incense, because it's not widely known. It's a very severed history, very severed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of my explorations in recent times. As you may well know, I returned to the Philippines for the first time since being born there, just mid-year last year, and only spent a month over there. It was a bit of a multifaceted journey, from just a family holiday to ancestral reconnection back to the motherland, but then also trying to track some of the ancient pre-Catholic Filipino mysticism and shamanic traditions. And so much of it has just been heavily tainted, if not completely shrouded over, by this flavor of Catholicism. So for myself, and this reconnection back to that Filipino side of my ancestry, which I have kind of shunned for such a long time, and that's going back to a whole childhood thing in connection to the mother, or connection to my mother. So yeah, that's been a really big piece for me. And then sometimes I feel like I lose the thread and I park it to the side, and then something else will pop up again and I trace it. And yeah, I feel like it's a slow burn for me, that particular journey of ancestral reconnection. And then there's the whole European side too, from Dad's ancestry, which goes through Ireland, England, Nordic, Scandinavian regions, even up into Siberia. So yeah, there's a lot there when it comes to navigating the ancestral reconnection piece. And yeah, what an interesting thing it is to feel where we orient ourselves within the assimilation of this very, very for myself, this very diverse blood lineage.
Yeah, and for you, Kai, is there a particular lineage that you feel more kind of called to? I know you just touched on the Filipino heritage. Does that speak most strongly for you?
I don't think it does. And at this point in time, I'm not sure there is one particular ancestral lineage that calls out to me so strong. And it's been, I think, because of that lack of a calling, that's really made up a large part of the way that I orient myself to earth-based traditions and earth-honoring ceremonies, in terms of looking at shamanism and animism as a cross-cultural, pan-cultural, all across our realm. It's embedded everywhere you look. If you go down any single one of our ancestral lineages, you can guarantee that there was someone, if not a large group of people, that were practicing animists, although they wouldn't have had that word, animism, because that was just the default normal state of consciousness and way of operating.
There.
But yeah,
that's
the thing. If we, yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I think we're losing a connection a little bit. It's still recording, like, because it's recording remotely on each of our ends, but we just can't hear each other. Yeah. But yeah, I was saying, just seeing that at the core of a lot of these shamanic practices and philosophies, and within shamanism and animism, it's a Vesica Pisces there, where they're both overlapping. But within that, there are foundations and pillars that can be found cross-culturally across our planet. And really that a lot of their learnings, their relationship, their connection, their mythologies, even their language it all arises from the larger theme that we're speaking to, which is the bioregional observation, the relationship with nature and with spirit from the land on which they live, the land all around them. So that's really been a driving force for me, while also having that ancestral lineage reconnection piece on my periphery and then coming more into frontal focus at times, and then also returning, like ebbs and flows, it comes for me.
Yeah. 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 Look, I think it's actually good to have that space too. You know, when you're talking about the ebbing and flowing, ancestral work can be incredibly it can be draining. You know, there's that element too where it's draining because you've got that, you know, that hunger, and you can hit a lot of brick walls, and that can be really, it can be really hard and disheartening at times too. So I think, you know, the practice of sustainability, you know, in terms of energy and coming back to center, coming back to the land in which we live, you know, and practicing that bioregional observation, and then going back to the ancestral kind of threads, you know, when we have that energy to do so. So I think it's really good to have that ebbing and flowing.
Yeah, the energy and also the calling, not forcing it, not pushing it. It will come when it's meant to come. And oh, you've cut out again. I'll wait until you
Yeah,
come back
no,
on, and then I'll.
yeah, yeah. You cut out. Yeah, I
Yeah, I've
got you.
got you again.
Yeah, got you.
Touching upon like expanding our horizons or our focus to look at the foundational philosophies or practices, or like when it comes to a lot of the earth honoring traditions or the earth based connection. Are there any spiritual philosophies or wisdom traditions that have had the greatest impact for you along your journey?
Well, I guess before, you know, speaking as a younger Carmen, you know, for me, I was always really drawn to, you know, certain, I guess, Native American culture and practice, you know, and that animistic relationship, or at which they still obviously have with the land. So that for me, as a little, as a little girl and a young Carmen, that was very inspiring to me because, you know, back then I didn't really know about my, you know, cultural connection and ancestry, and, you know, I didn't realize that I'd be sitting where I am today, and, you know, would have explored or experienced all the things I have to get me to where I am. So that was a really big inspiration for me when I was younger. And still, I guess, you know, to this day, it still is, you know, and learning a lot about, you know, the land on which we're on. You know, I'm here on Woiwurrung country, and, you know, learning to listen to Indigenous voices and the way that they interact with the land, and spending time with, you know, traditional custodians. They're always inspiring me, you know, always. And I think it's really important to note too that there's a place of leaving wisdom, letting it sit. Everything that I thought I knew, you know, it's just leaving it there, and just being humble and being the forever student. You know, I'm sitting there, I'm listening to those traditional voices, and which is ultimately leading me back to my own ancestry and my own culture. So it's been a really beautiful kind of, I guess, you know, circle, yeah, to come back to that.
Yeah. Is there, I'm curious if there's anything else here to open up and explore when it comes to where you're at currently with your own exploration of your Slavic
Mm,
Balkan ancestry. What's present for you
mm.
and what's alive for you?
Ah, well, okay. The first thing that comes to heart when you know you've asked that question is really, I think about my father. And my dad at the moment, as you know, I'm sure I've shared with you, he actually has liver cancer. And I'm about to make the journey back to South Australia to go and, you know, be with him, to be with my family. And for me, when I'm thinking about, you know, walking the medicine path and what that means, it's like I'm the firekeeper. You know, I am the lineage holder. I'm the last one of that kind of line. So, you know, I mean, I'm hoping Dad's going to be around for quite a while longer, but I'm it. You know, I'm really the only one in the family that's really interested in my cultural connection, cultural heritage, cultural history, learning, you know, the animistic foundations of my Slavic culture. So to me, it's really vital that I spend as much time as I can back to the land that grew me up, and, you know, spending time with my dad to really keep that kind of flame going. You know, I had a dream about my grandmother, you know, after she passed away, my baka. Baka is, you know, Croatian for grandmother. And shortly after my baka passed away, she came to me in my dreams, and she was sitting opposite me in my dream space, and we were telepathically communicating. So there was no, you know, we weren't verbalizing at all. It was all telepathic. She sat opposite me in my dream space, and she held her hands up to me, and she took her hands off like a pair of gloves, and she gave them to me. She gave me her hands, and I was holding her hands in my hands. And, you know, she basically said to me that, you know, I'm handing you, you know, it's your turn, basically. So that dream really stuck with me. And I feel like this process where I'm sitting at now, you know, I'm 42 years old. I feel like that's like a really big age for me for some reason. You know, I'm on some kind of precipice of change, of really developing this deeper relationship with spirit. And I feel like this move of going back to Adelaide is also really deepening my connection to the Slavic culture, and also getting curious about the Hungarian side too, which I've kind of have ignored. But there's something about Hungarian shamanism and you know, being Hungarian, that there's some threads to kind of reweave there as well. So that's
Yeah, I feel like there are so many of us in this day and age that are being offered the opportunity and the awareness that it's up to us to be a pivot point along our own ancestral lineage into new ways of being. So heart-centered and soul-oriented leadership and ancestral reconnection and returning to the earth. It just seems like such a common thread. And yeah, there is this, you know, there's a few terms that get thrown around in this day and age, and you can make of them what you will, such as the great turning or the great revealing, the great awakening. There's lots of ways in which you can unpack that. But I think, yeah, for a lot of us, this is one of the big themes within that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing too. It's, you know, everybody is has the capacity and is capable and is deserving of belonging, you know, of returning. And, you know, for those that maybe are lost and don't know how to retrace those threads, it's really, you know, coming back to nature is really a turning point for that, I think. You know, coming back to look at everything is alive, everything is in communication and relationship with each other all the time, and we're part of that. So I think it's really important that, you know, to remind everybody that, you know, that we're all capable of great things, you know, of great potential. Yeah.
In one of my recent podcast conversations with Nathan Miola, I waited until the very end of the conversation to ask the question that I'm going to ask you, but I didn't want to wait until the end of the conversation for this one, because his answer really made me think, gee, if only we had more time to tease apart the answer that he gave, because there was just so much juice in there that could have been squeezed out. So I'll ask the question now, and I don't necessarily expect an answer from you now. I'm just rather seeding this question for maybe potential later, or if something comes through now, feel free to explore it. But the question is, what kind of questions might you like to be asked that you don't often get asked?
Well,
Because I feel like that's a question that speaks to something deeper within us.
yeah, it is. And, you know, it's like it almost needs space
Totally.
to be able to really feel into that, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, when I asked Nathan that, he ummed and ahed for ages, and geez, it must have taken him almost like a minute to offer up an
It's probably going to take
answer.
me longer.
But one of the things that I love... Yeah, go ahead, Carmen.
I listened to part of that podcast, and it was just so beautiful to listen to. It was just, you know, I've listened to your podcast when I'm driving occasionally, and that was a really beautiful, you know, beautiful listening, that one.
Yeah, great. I love what Nathan has to bring, the slow medicine, bear medicine. And that was something, that was what one of his answers was. He wished he would love to be asked more about his bear ancestry.
Yeah, wow.
And I thought, ooh, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of juice in there. Yeah. So anyways,
Can I mean, I know that we're recording right now, but can I ask you that question, Kai? So if you were on the other side of this. What about you?
Yeah. There's something there about ancestry beyond just the human ancestry. Exploring that, because that's something that I don't often talk about. Metaphysical ancestry that I've experienced in numerous higher states or non-ordinary states of consciousness that I know are always with me, and then bird ancestry too. And it's interesting to feel like I'd love to be asked about my bird ancestry, which I don't often get asked about. And it's interesting because it's not something that I speak about. So how's that for a paradox or a dichotomy?
Yeah.
There's lots of birds that I'm happy to speak about, but then, there's a bird that's been with me for a long time, and it's not a relationship that I speak about because it's so deep and intimate and intense. It's just between me and that bird.
Beautiful. That's yeah. I hear, and I really respect that, wanting to keep that contained as well. Keeping that medicine contained and intact. And it's so easy, I think, when you're in these spaces too, to want to share everything, especially when we're walking this, medicine path or shamanic path, because we have so many incredible experiences that just seem so magical, and we want to share them all the time. I mean, I can be guilty of that for sure. I want to share it with somebody, but sometimes the medicine is best when it's, contained.
Yeah, for myself, it makes the relationship all the more intense and intimate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on that note, is there? Oh yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
it's something interesting I have been pondering lately. So I don't really know if it's a question as such, but I've been pondering my relationship with stones and with feathers. So, yeah.
Where have those musings led you to?
Feeding them, tending to them, really honoring the energetics and the spirit of them. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And there's this such an extraction of the land, when it comes to stones, let's say crystals, for example. We just, take and there's not really a lot of that relationship of reciprocity. So I think that's a really important thing, for me, as a woman walking the medicine path, is this relation of reciprocity, and, and ways in which we can give back. So, I feel like that's a really important part of who I am and what I do. So, which, I talk about it in my Instagram posts, but I don't necessarily talk about it really openly.
What have you got to say in regards to feeding them?
Okay, well, for example, feathers. Now, maybe I'll share a story because this has actually happened to me last night. So, and I did want to talk to you about this too, to see what your thoughts were. But there was a period of time where I was actually gifted. I was gifted 3 wings in 1 week, and which I found was pretty incredible. So one of those I think it was the week of my 40th birthday, so a couple of years ago now. A dear friend of mine gifted me an incredible cockatoo wing. Then a parcel arrived in the mail, and my beautiful friends from the Flinders Ranges, they gifted me 2 wings. One of them was a falcon, and the other one was an owl. I think it was a barn owl. So all of a sudden, in 1 week, I've been gifted these 3 wings. So I really sat with the medicine of that, and, wondering why these wings have come to me, and, how I'm to use them. How do I need to honor them? And one of those things is making sure, I mean, they sit on my altar space. I'm always feeding, the spirit of my altar, feeding my altar space, but also being that these winged ones, they once were soaring in the sky, close to the sun, in the wind. So I really wanted to acknowledge and feed the spirit of these wings. So I bring them outside occasionally, and I move them in the wind, and I move them in the smoke, and I lay them on the earth, and really honor the spirit, and try and yeah, just walk with integrity, I guess. That's the relationship that I've cultivated with these particular wings. Last night I was cleaning my altar space and I decided to put my owl wing for the first time outside under the moon. And I knew that there was the aurora happening and all this incredible stuff. So I decided to put my owl wing out, under the night sky where it belongs. And I actually forgot about it. So this morning when I went outside, there's my owl wing sitting, in my salvia bush, dripping wet. And I thought, oh, I hope I haven't ruined it. But anyway, it was just interesting how this experience happened for me and unfolded in terms of, giving the night to this wing. Yeah, honouring the owl medicine.
Yeah, I ask about the feeding because it's something that's been coming into my field lately. You speak about tending your altar or your mesa, and I have numerous stones and also feathers and wings, and birds have had their way of coming to me for many years now, and that's been part of my earth honouring practices, is to create and craft all these beautiful wings, whether on deer antlers or sticks or wrapping them in leather handles. So yeah, lots of feathers, lots of bird medicine and lots of stone medicine. And after spending some time at one of my altars, which is, I'm just looking at them now, I realized that I hadn't fed or tended. When I use the word feed, I'm really talking about a state of awareness or a state of attention. I hadn't fed them for a while, and there was some up there, and I can't remember the mountains which they come from. And there's a grief in there because it's reflective of the aspects of myself and the aspects of my own practice and awareness where there isn't the appropriate attention or reciprocity given. Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of the time, but it's just, there's pockets where these sacred allies aren't tended to in what I feel like, what I know within myself is the right way. So yeah, just the different layers coming back into my life of reciprocity, Aini, if you're familiar with that term. From the Kero people up in the Andes Mountains, they speak about Aini, A-Y-N-I, sacred reciprocity. Yeah, I feel like that is an important piece, feeding with appropriate attention, with appropriate appreciation, awareness. And also the feeling within myself that I've forgotten where some of these stones have come from. There's a loss of a relationship there. And then it also feels appropriate to me to return them back to the earth. Yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. And it's interesting that you talk. You've noticed that observation, because I too have been like that. When I am disconnected, when I don't tend to my altar space, or when I'm not feeding the spirit of the altar, through obviously objects or through song or through, intention, when I'm not tending to that altar space, it actually affects everything else in the house. It affects the way that I am. It makes me feel disconnected. So, really being disciplined and dedicated, even if it's just for a few minutes, spending that time, even with the stones, some of the stones I have, I'm not a crystal collector as such, but I'm more about stones. Some of those stones that I have, some of them might require, some salt water that I have to feed them, or whatever it is, or returning to the land, to the land where they belong. If I know where they've come from, it's all of that. So I hear you. Yeah. Yeah.
We've been going for a little while now, Carmen.
Yeah.
Hour and 24 minutes and 24 seconds, if I'm being precise.
Good. Well, I got over my little conniption, didn't I? Yeah. Oh, God.
Well, yeah, we can start to wrap it up, but maybe I'll ask about your vision, the vision that's percolating for you, or that's calling you forth, not just for 2024, but the greater vision which you're being drawn towards.
Yeah. That is the greater vision for me, is to just really to support others to hear their own song. You know, it's really to support others to come home to themselves. And I mean that in a way, I mean, I can only take people as far as I've gone. And, you know, I can only show people the things that I've discovered. And, you know, I really say that from a humble and loving place. But, you know, when you start to learn nature connection, when you're learning the song of the birds, or, you know, activating your senses, that's incredibly powerful. You know, and I think from that place we're able to heal, we're able to inspire others, and that's really my hope, you know, for humanity, is that we, you know, we come together and learn to see each other, you know, and love each other, respect each other, listen to each other. I mean, that's really why I do what I do, and I really hope that we, you know, start seeing nature as a beautiful friend of ours, and we take care of her. You know, that we stop cutting down trees, that we plant endemic species, that we, you know, pick up an injured animal on the side of the road. You know, simple acts of kindness. That's really what you know, what I hope to instill. Yeah.
What are the main offerings and initiatives that you're focusing on at the moment? And also, how are people feeling most called to work with you?
So at the moment, I mean, I'm in a bit of a transitional period at the moment, but really, I'm always up until August, my treatment space will be open. So I'm offering earth-based Reiki sessions here in the treatment space, and also offering incense crafting workshops, which is more about nature connection as well. So I weave lots of nature connection into those offerings. So that's really what I'm focused on at the moment. Moving forward, as I move back to Adelaide on Kaurna country, I will be, you know, reviewing, I guess, my services and reopening. You know, once I have a time to settle, I'll be reopening and offering my services in new ways, maybe deeper ways. I don't know. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you feel is pertinent to share or discuss, or drop a little seed for next time before we finish up?
Oh, there's always something, Kai. Once you get me started, that's it. You know, I can talk. So we better wrap it up, because I can just keep going.
All right. Well, how can everyone connect with you or learn more about you and stay updated on what you're offering? Because I know you've got a few channels. You got social media, website, Etsy, whatever else is going on.
Yep.
Share it with us.
So, okay, so probably one of the best ways to stay up to date is through Instagram. I try and post through my Instagram platform fairly regularly. I do have obviously a website as well with all of my offerings on there. Just a little important note, though, that I might as well vocalize here is I am in a transitional period of changing my business name. So Lulani Moon has been with me for maybe about 20 odd years. And within the next 6 months, I'll be changing business name. So that will be coming. And that's going to be inspired by the geological epochs, just to leave a little teaser there.
Ooh. Oh,
yes,
you can't do that to us.
I love fossils, dinosaurs, anything like that. So there's going to be lots of weavings in of
okay,
geological epochs. So that'll be coming. Yeah.
Okay. Deaths and rebirths. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so social media, that's the main place.
Social media, yeah. Instagram and through my website.
Yep, I'll have those links in the show notes for anyone who wants to come and connect. Any final words, Carmen?
No final words other than thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to, you know, to talk, to share, and to connect.
You're a gem, Carmen. Okay, cool. Let's wrap it up. Listeners, viewers, let's offer a big thanks to Carmen for carving out some space time to have this convo. Go tune in with Carmen via social media. Show some love. If you want to connect with me, you can search my handle on Instagram or TikTok or whatever you use more, which is at Kayuta Kiora. This is on YouTube, Spotify, all the podcasting apps, and there's the website, kayutakiora.com. And you can read up on some of the experiences that we have listed there. And I've just posted a new upcoming events page, which has dates for the pilgrimage that's coming up, Vision Quest that's coming up later in the year, so you can head to the website for more details. But for now, we'll leave it at that. I hope this episode has offered some insight, sparked your curiosity in one way or another, and has offered you something akin to being as fruitful as birdsong on morning wind. Thanks, Carmen. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you.